Okay, good. Well, hello, everybody. Hey, Tony, welcome. So
Thank you.
glad you could present to us at the Small Firm Forum East Bay today. As you will all have seen in the announcement, we have Tony Madrone speaking with us today from Indra Designs, and he will speak about a restorative resource management approach to dealing with water on projects. And he'll do so with projects both at a small, let's say one site, one house scale, up to larger civic and municipal projects. And I think it'll be interesting for us to see the scale and some of the things happening in that space. I was really intrigued when meeting with Tony this past year and a little bit this year about some water project design for a new ADU in Oakland. Apart from that, I'm going to find out if there are any announcements. I'll ask those of us in the room here, but those of us that are joining this remotely, just use the hand tool in the Zoom, and someone here will monitor that and will read out the announcements. So we'll just give a couple of minutes for that. Donald, do you have anything? Nope. Mike?
No, thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. Therese? No? Okay. Looking to see if there are any announcements coming through here. How would I see that, Donald? It would pop up as like
It'll show up
by their name. Okay.
If I don't.
All right. So no announcements. Let's just get forward and take it away, Tony.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mercedes, and thank you everybody for having me today. I'm very excited to get this moment to connect with all of you. And again, Mercedes, I appreciate the opportunity. So thank you for including me in this. I will go ahead and share my screen, but maybe just at first, we'll just do a quick couple of process things. If you do have any questions as this presentation is going on, I would definitely prefer you just to jump in and throw out your ideas right then. Let's not wait till the end and have conversations then. I'd rather it just be almost conversational. So if there's a slide up and I want clarification on that, please just raise your hand or send something in the chat. Either way is great with me. I would rather be interrupted than force you to wait till the very end. And, a lot of other questions can come up. So just jump in at any time. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with the slideshow. All right.
Good.
Can everybody see that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Again, as Mercedes said, my name is Tony Madrone. I am the principal of Indra Designs, and we focus on restorative resource management. We do analysis, design, and oversight of restorative resource management. And I'll get into what all of that means as we go along. We've been around for about 20 years and doing all kinds of different projects throughout the entire all of California, honestly, and primarily focused in the Bay Area and greater Sacramento regions. So thank you for having me. We've done a lot of work in the East Bay. I used to live there, and it's been one of my favorite places to do a lot of work. So I have scattered projects all over the East Bay. So it's nice to be speaking with you all. Let's go ahead and move to the first slide. So definitions are going to be I have this little bar that's in my way. Let me see if I can move that. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So just general introduction is that water is essential to life. I'm a hydrophiliac, I guess is the best way to say it. I love water in all of its different forms. I love swimming in water. I love kayaking. I have 2 young boys. We spend as much time as we can at creeks and rivers. So anything water related inspires me. And that is kind of how I got into this work. We started as a landscape company, and it slowly grew into this revelation that we need to protect water and this essential resource, and landscaping is a very large use of water. And so that's what got me inspired. And I started then inquiring deeper into, okay, well, with our landscape designs and installations, how can we be more water efficient? Which grew to, efficient irrigation, of course, native plantings, xeriscape, all of that. But it also then developed into, water reuse. There's actually all this water we could be reusing for irrigation. And then it just kind of spiraled now into, we look at all resources, not just water, but water is kind of our primary focus. And that's what we'll be looking at mostly today. So water is life. It is essential. We're 80% water. The earth is 80% water. It's an inevitability of our existence. And I think we need to be very, very intelligent in our use of water and how we take care of it. So that's important to me. Here's a little slide on Earth's water distribution. As you can see, most of the earth is ocean. We can't drink ocean water unless we desalinate, and there's challenges there. But of the 100% of Earth's water, only 3% is actually fresh water. Now, of that fresh water, we only have 30%, a little over 30% that's actually available, because most of it's stored as ice caps and glaciers, which we currently aren't drinking. And then the groundwater is a pretty big percent, 30%. But remember, that's of this 3%, right? So it's becoming fractional at this point. So of that groundwater, though, there's not that much that is accessible to us as drinking water. It is a pretty small amount. Once we start to boil it all down and we take swamps out and we take, certain portions of lakes and rivers and all of this away, we get down to a number that's below 0.5% of the Earth's water is actually available as potable water to humans. And so, we have to share that less than 0.5% with 8 billion people currently and growing daily. So we really need to be cautious and thoughtful how we approach water. And so then my work really came into play when I started looking at this number, which is only 15% of our residential water consumption need to be potable. So it's a pretty small amount that actually has to be potable, yet we use nearly 100% of our residential water uses nearly 100% potable water. So that's kind of what got me really inspired to look at, all right, what can we do differently here? How can we change this around? So that's what we'll be looking at a little bit today. So I wanted to go over a couple definitions just so we can all be on the same page with words that might come up throughout this. And if you have any questions, obviously, please do reach out. The restorative resource management. So I know we all know resource management. We approach it from a restorative standpoint, and that is a holistic and inclusive approach to resource management, balancing water, habitat, air, soil, and energy. We need our resources and they need our intelligent use. So the idea is that I think traditionally we look at resources as, okay, what can we take? What can we take? How can we use it for our consumption, essentially, as humans? And what we are trying to do is flip that around to consider our relationship with resources as symbiotic. So not only how can we receive from those resources, but how can we give back? How can we ensure that they are sustainable for future generations and around for a long time? So that's kind of the idea of restorative resource management, is to remove the concept that the resources are here for us to take and use as we want, but more to consider them a vital relationship that we must create together. So that is restorative resource management. Continuing definitions, we're going to talk a lot about alternative water sources today. So I want to go over the alternative water sources so we all know when I say rainwater, what does rainwater mean, right? So we're going to start with black water. We all know that black water is wastewater from toilets, dishwashers, kitchen sinks, and utility sinks. Currently, black water is clumped together with gray water. So it's all of the water that gets into the sewer piping and the drain pipes of the home. Those typically are all considered black water since it's all merged together. That's why it says can include gray water. But the kitchen sinks is a big one. I have a lot of people that miss the reality that kitchen sinks are in fact black water. And that's primarily due to the oils and meats and cheeses and different things that would end up in the kitchen sink that will quickly create, black water that, it will quickly create a lot of challenges for that water, and it'll degrade its quality very, very rapidly. So kitchen sinks are included in black water. So gray water is the wastewater from clothes washers, bathtubs, showers, and bathroom sinks. So all of those, because they're gray water, can be reused quite easily for landscape irrigation and for other supplies that we'll look at later, or other demands that we can look at later. Condensate is a good one. So condensate is water that comes out of the air conditioner. We've all seen the air conditioner that has that little bit of water spilling out of it. Well, that is condensate water. It can be reused. Foundation drainage, it's called nuisance groundwater. So any of that water, this is typically found in commercial buildings, but it oftentimes can be if a basement exists in a building. But that nuisance water, nuisance groundwater, is foundation drainage and has great reuse potential. Now, rainwater is a good, important definition, because it's not just all the rainwater. We define rainwater as precipitation that lands on rooftops or above grade surfaces. So that doesn't include on-ground impermeable surfaces. It only includes the rooftops and above ground surfaces. So that's rainwater. Evaporative cooling, that's again primarily for commercial buildings. The blowdown water is often for the cooling towers within the buildings, and it's a pretty good amount of water that can come off of there, but it does have heavy mineral content, so it can be a little challenging to work with. And then stormwater is everything that's not rainwater, all the precipitation that's not rainwater. So anything that falls on the surface that can be the permeable or impermeable ground level surfaces around. So those are all very important alternative water potentials, and that's how we define those currently. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts on that at this point? Or does that all make sense? Okay, perfect. And then integrated waters. I like to use this term because, we have this, we like to silo everything. When I say we, I just mean kind of humans in general. We have a tendency to sort of silo stuff so that we can understand it a little better. So we want to say black water is this and rainwater is this. And it's good to do that so that we can look at each one as a unique source and understand its unique properties. But really, at the end of the day, water is fully integrated. It all ends up in the same place. It all comes from the same place. It all kind of has to integrate together in one way or another. So it's really important that we understand how these waters are all interconnected and the way that they all do interact with each other, regardless of the silo that we might put them in and the name we might call them. At the end of the day, all that water will interact with all the other water at some point, because it's a closed loop system here on this beautiful planet of ours. So that is integrated waters. Moving on, watershed. I'm sure we've all heard this, and probably most people know this quite well, but a watershed is an area of land that drains rainfall and snowmelt into streams and rivers. I like to consider it all of the water that creates a river. Like, what's all the water that leads into a river? That's a little bit, too simplistic in a sense, because there are groundwater components to it that come into play. But essentially, you can imagine it's all the rainfall that falls into an area, comes together, and typically and leads into the ocean at some point. So that is a watershed, and it's an important idea because any one thing that happens to that water within a watershed can impact all parts of that watershed very directly. So that is an important concept to look at. Okay, so that kind of sums us up with general definitions. And now I'm going to go into some ideas and thoughts to look at. And I have segmented out this presentation to look at different parts of projects that we might look at that we can consider water reuse, or that water, is an important part of. So the first one we're going to start with is going to be buildings here. And that's what I know you all work a lot on. And so this is a really important piece of the puzzle. And something that I always try to encourage and talk to architects about is this concept of dual plumbing. And so dual plumbing is the process of providing separate plumbing for non-potable and potable supplies, as well as gray water and black water discharge piping. So essentially, how that would work, and I'll give you an example here, is that you would have your potable water supply that feeds, the sinks, the showers, the refrigerator water, all of the different things that we interact with in a way that they need to be potable. But the non-potable supplies primarily would be the demands in a home would primarily be the toilets, for example, or also the laundry is another example. So what you would do for dual plumbing is you would have one run of pipe that is potable that goes to all the potable water supplies in that home. And then you would have another run of pipe that goes to the non-potable water supplies. Now, what it does is it allows the building to then be activated for indoor non-potable reuse, which will come up as a slide next. But it's important because if that's done during the planning and initial development phase, that leads to a really simplistic ability for us as water management folk to come in and plug into that non-potable water supply. We can take rainwater, we can flush toilets with it. We could actually take gray water and flush toilets with gray water, storm water, the nuisance foundation water. So this allows us to then take that, take the potable water supply away from the non-potable indoor needs. And so here's an example. This is at a school in San Francisco, actually, where it's the first permitted system for flushing toilets with rainwater at a public school in California. And what you can see here, the pipes are all painted, so it's maybe a little hard to see, but right here, this pipe coming out is the potable water supply. So that's just your standard municipal water supply, fed through the backflow preventer for protection, and it comes up here to a three-way valve. And then this pipe here is the non-potable dual plumbing pipe. So what that pipe does is it goes to the toilets inside this administrative building. So that feeds all the toilets in the administrative building, and that's the only place that goes. What this allows us to do then is this is the treatment train for the rainwater. So when that rainwater is treated and we have enough rainwater, then that can be the feed that goes in to flush the toilets. When that rainwater supply is low, or if there's a challenge with the system, then we can override that. And this can be done automatically. This is an automatic valve that gets overridden as needed, but it can also be done manually. And then that reverts to municipal supply if we don't have enough rainwater or there's something going on with the system. So that's dual plumbing. And then that also applies to the gray water. So if when you design a building and that building gets built, if during that process, we right then take all the gray water sources and keep them as a single pipe fed out to the same point that the black water pipes get fed out, and then connect them together at a final point before going into the sewer lateral or into the septic system, wherever it ends up, that segregation of piping allows a very cost-friendly as well as simple process for us to then pull that gray water out and use it for other needs, such as irrigation primarily, and other things that we can use that gray water for. So that's dual plumbing. It's really important, and it's something that I personally am trying to encourage as many people as possible during the remodel process or the new build process to just dual plumb. It doesn't cost that much extra to do when that home is being built. It's literally 10 times or more costly to do it after the fact. So if I have to get in there with my team and start cutting all those pipes up to get the gray water sources out, it'll cost 10 times as much for us to do it then as it would if it was done while the building was being built. So that's something, hopefully, if nothing else happens, that maybe you all could consider dual plumbing as something to incorporate into your designs as you go forth. So then in the buildings, the indoor non-potable reuse. So we sort of went over that. The primary sources for indoor non-potable reuse, again, are toilets, flushing toilets, and laundry. Laundry supply is a little tricky because oftentimes you'll have hot water and cold water going into laundry. And so that hot water, it can be non-potable, but it just means you have to have a separate heating system for that water. And it can be a little bit difficult to do. So we'll typically just use the cold water feed as the non-potable reuse supply. But non-potable reuse is the treating and reusing of rainwater, gray water, stormwater, mechanical water, and or black water for indoor non-potable supplies, toilets and laundry. Now, the black water one, I think probably gets a lot of people, maybe give people a little, the jitters of like, oh, we're bringing black water back into the house. And so that doesn't happen that commonly. It's not one of our high level, let's do this regularly. That's for, typically larger buildings. I think a good example is the SFPUC building. If you haven't ever visited it, is amazing. They have a beautiful living system that takes all the black water, all the wastewater from the entire building, treats it through some natural solutions, BMPs, and treats it to the point that water can then be reused as a non-potable indoor supply, and they flush all the toilets in the building with that treated black water. So it can be done, and it's pretty cool. But definitely the rest of these are a lot easier to get prepared for bringing back into the building. So that is non-potable. Oh, and this is a system in San Francisco as well at a private residence, actually an architect, and he really wanted to just push the envelope. What can I do? So this is a gray water rainwater combination system that the gray water is the primary supply for the non-potable. So this goes to all the toilets in the home, 4 toilets, as well as all of the laundry. There's 2 laundries there, so the cold water feed for laundries. So the dominant source is the gray water. So the gray water feeds first, and then the rainwater is the backup when gray water is low, and then the municipal water will be the final backup, all done automatically. And I can go into that a little later on, but so that is indoor non-potable reuse. The other thing with buildings, and this is kind of a big one we'll go over quite a bit, would be rainwater collection. So rainwater collection is something we do a lot of. It's really clean. It falls on the roof. It's the rainwater. The only thing that makes it not clean in our area, some places have, acid rain and other challenges that they're facing. But for us, it's just how dirty is that rooftop? So we do things like a first flush filter, which you can kind of see over here. So that'll help to kind of clean anything that might be dirty off of that roof when it first falls, send that away from the tank. And then once that roof is a little more clean, we can send it into the tanks. But rainwater collection can be used for irrigation, fire suppression, water cooling towers, toilet flushing, as well as potable water for households in some counties. Sonoma has one permitted potable water supply for rainwater, but in general, California is scared of that. But if you go to Australia and Hawaii and a lot of other places, they use it all the time for potable water. Texas is actually significantly ahead of California. There's tons of permitted potable water supplies for rainwater in a lot of areas. So it's starting to happen in California, but there's still a lot of fear around it. What if? There's always the what ifs. The ROI for rainwater is difficult to discuss because water, in my opinion, isn't properly priced. We don't place enough value on water. But as we see that curve continue to explode as it has been as to the cost of water, we'll really start to see that ROI drop. But the way that the ROI really applies is if rainwater is also used as a best management practice to meet your California LID requirements. So this system specifically is on a site in Alameda where they didn't have a lot of landscapable space. And so the challenge really was that they had a huge rooftop, excuse me, that had to collect, that they had to then mitigate a significant amount of that stormwater to meet their LID requirements, but they didn't have enough landscapable space to do that through traditional BMPs, LID BMPs. So we came in and we did a rainwater system. Now this is only a 10,000 gallon tank, but we brought that water back indoors for toilet flushing it's a brewery and a couple other things there. It's some other things, but anyways, so it goes back into the building for toilet flushing. And we were able to take 10,000 gallon tank and it actually mitigates 90,000 gallons plus a year of that stormwater, which allowed them to meet their LID requirements to move forward with the building. So it can be some creative ways that you can use rainwater to solve some of the solutions. And funny enough, the developer, he had no care or interest in being green and doing this great water conservation project. That was kind of the secondary benefit for him. He just was like, I just want this to be solved so I can, finish my building and get some renters in here. So yeah, and then also rainwater is great for LEED certifications. So I'll go over I'll give you a couple examples of some rainwater collection systems that we've done and kind of how they can operate, and just so you can see. This is a system in Menlo Park. This is a 10,000 gallon underground cistern, which was a nail biting, fun experience of sending it over. This house was just newly remodeled, so it's a beautiful home, and we're sending a 10,000 gallon tank and a crane over. It was a stressful day. But this system, will saves 15,000 gallons of water per year, and it's a 10,000 gallon tank. But 15,000 gallons is because we use some irrigation still during some of the rainy season, so that tank will refill a few times on average over the course of the year, so that it doesn't refill fully, but it will refill partially to make that 15,000 gallon number. So it's not just only 10,000 gallons. But this site also had some drainage issues, and Menlo Park was requiring them to mitigate the entirety of their rooftop. And so we took the entire rooftop and put it into this tank that then overflows into a rain garden afterwards. And then the buried tank is nice because a lot of times, especially in the more urban environment, we won't have a lot of space in backyards and or front yards. And so we can be creative with underground. We can put them under, driveways, under all kinds of different things. And on top of this tank in specific was a beautiful vegetable garden that we created these vegetable beds, and they could grow all kinds of fun food on top of it. So that was a pretty cool project there. Here's another example. This was a small San Francisco backyard. And as I don't know how many of you know that Sarah, yeah.
Sorry, Tony, I just had a question about that tank.
Yeah. You want me to go back to this tank? This tank?
Yeah, really, that tank, for example, what physical size is it, if you remember off the top of your head roughly? And then what
it was 13 feet long and about 8 feet high. Oh, I'm sorry, I take that back. Not 8 feet. The hole we put it in was 8 feet deep. So it was 6 feet. 6 feet high.
Okay. And then I'm wondering if the decision about where to place it or how deep the hole was needed to consult with the structural engineer, if it was too close, if it was close enough to the house, like what's involved in that kind of situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the angle of repose was very important on this. So we had to be far enough away from foundation. There's also a lot of setback, challenges off of property lines. And so luckily they had a wide enough backyard that we were able to find that sort of perfect location where we could go 8 feet down and not cause any issues. But it did need to run past a structural, and we had to do some shoring of the wall as it went down, and there were some OSHA requirements of the ladder and safety pieces. So there was a couple pieces of that puzzle. In order, he could have put a 10,000 gallon tank in his backyard above ground, and it would have cost him, a lot less to do. But he was an Apple executive and just had no concern with whatever money it took, and really didn't want to have to see a tank. So he really pushed for this. Oh, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. It's muted.
Oh, sorry. Does it go into a lined concrete pit, or is it just earth that it goes into? Because you mentioned the ladder.
Just earth, and then it required a backfill of like drain rock and various other components. It had to be strapped down in the interest of buoyancy and float. Float becomes an issue if groundwater or a lot of storm water gets into that hole. It can push these tanks up and create a pretty bad situation. So yeah, they get strapped down and all kinds of special considerations to make that work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. This is another example of an underground. This is an 8,000 gallon system that over the course of the year will mitigate 14,000 gallons of storm water. And the rainwater is used for all the irrigation in the backyard, toilet flushing of the home. And so again, this is tiny little backyard in San Francisco. Again, we had to work with this angle of repose and meeting all our setbacks. But the city of San Francisco was really excited about this. And it kind of worked out because it wasn't a totally tiny backyard. It was kind of long, but we built a deck on top of this cistern. So this cistern literally lives underneath this beautiful deck that they have. And then they have some landscaped areas. And again, it flushes toilets and also does the irrigation for the whole backyard there. So that's another example. And these are modular systems. I'll show you one more of these here. What's really neat with these modular systems is that they can be any size. I mean, relative to the cube that it is, but they can be any size and shape. And they're also incredibly strong for having a 98% capacity, water capacity. You can still, 98% of this space is still water. But they have incredible strength. So you can actually put these underneath driveways, parking lots. They oftentimes use these for stormwater detention and big projects like that. But we also use them a lot for rainwater collection which in my opinion is also stormwater detention. And so, yeah, so that's pretty cool. This specific one is in, where was this one? Oh, Pleasanton. And it mitigates over 50,000 gallons of stormwater. And it collects, the collected water is used to irrigate an entire 1 acre of landscape in Pleasanton. So they wanted to landscape this huge area and have a pool. Obviously, the city of Pleasanton was like, wait a second, you can't use all this water. That's going to, drain our entire supply. But they really wanted to move forward with it. So we helped them, one, design intelligent landscape so that we're using the least amount of water in the landscape as they could. But two, we put in this huge system that will cover all the irrigation needs for their site. So and then we put a bocce ball court on top of it. So it's kind of a cool finish to the whole thing. But this is just some kind of unique approaches to rainwater. That's not just your typical, tank that gets thrown into a yard, although most of our systems end up being kind of above ground tanks. And then this one is the last one I'll talk about. This was back to that system in Alameda that I was talking about. And that's, I kind of already went over this, so we can mostly skip this slide. But yeah, 92,000 gallons of stormwater off of the building's roof are mitigated and dealt with in a way. But that means also that 92,000 gallons of potable water are saved by using non-potable water supply from this system.
Tony, I think
Right.
Mercedes has another question.
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. So my question is about the use of the term, the rainfall needs. I'm not going to get the phrase right, but is there a way in which, like, the annual rainfall calculations use some kind of average, and how do you deal with that with all of our change? Like, how does that work?
For sure. So we have a process. We can do it on a daily basis if you want. So we take, CMS data primarily, and then we use the past 10 years, and we do a low, moderate, and high season. And we typically will size our systems to the low. At least we'll size the need of the system to the low, but then we size the piping of the system to the high. So we want to make sure that in the event of a huge 100-year storm, that pipes are big enough to collect all of that water that might come dumping off of that roof. But we want to make sure that we also are like, hey, if we want this to irrigate the entire landscape, we need to make sure the volume is large enough for that low season. So we'll typically look at it on a monthly basis. So we'll line up the monthly precipitation, and then there's a whole calculation for how much water we'll be able to collect off of the square footage that we're going to be collecting off of. And so then we run it's called our tank volume process. And so then we basically align that precipitation with the demand of the month. And so then we kind of create this curve that allows us to go, okay, the volume of the tank will be full in January, but come August, it'll be completely empty, or, we'll be able to assess that. And then we can adjust the demand and the volume of that tank per the specific need of that site, or of what we're trying to provide supply for. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's getting there. It helps me kind of get a picture. I'm not following all of it, but in terms of, is it typical that a rainwater cistern might hold water in it like all year long, I suppose? Like, does it have
Absolutely.
quote, water, and does it get stale? And
For sure. Great question.
stale, the landscape, but
Yeah. So SFPUC, for example, has a drawdown requirement. You need to show that each year this tank is going to get drawn down, and so that you will use the majority of it. Most places don't have that requirement yet. And for example, Australia has a really cool study that they did where they actually left a tank sitting for 20 years. And they allowed the sediment layer to sit in there. There's a 1.5-inch sediment layer at the bottom of the tank. They came back and tested it 20 years later. The water is actually better quality than when they left it 20 years ago. So, there's some interesting points to be made there. But as far as California code goes, there's typically no requirement to use that water. But I think the CPC is looking to, the California Plumbing Code is looking to adopt that as a requirement, that drawdown requirement. But really, at the end of the day, from what I've seen, that water does stay well, good water quality. It's really based on that first flush system, like I talked about. If you're getting water off of a roof that has tons of bird crap on it, for example, when that goes into that tank, then that introduces bacteria that can then turn, that water septic, for example. But the typical, once that pre-filtration is done, the typical sediment that will get into a tank creates a small layer on the bottom, generally fine and not a problem to leave, and that water quality will hold well. Again, Australia will say for 20 years or more. Most jurisdictions don't have a requirement of drawdown, but at least for the entire year, you won't have any problems. And that sediment layer just has to get cleaned out every once in a while if the pre-filtration isn't up to snuff on catching as much of that sediment as possible.
I think we have another question here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
Speak up.
This is the microphone. Is there any chemical pollution testing of the water after 1 year, 10, 20, whatever?
There are a lot of water quality studies that have been done, and most of them I've seen come out of Australia, but Texas has been doing a few. I can't speak completely to that, but what I will say is this: every single region is very unique in that. Just like if we were at the East Coast and some areas of Detroit, you might have acid rain pieces that you're dealing with, and the contamination there is a whole different world. Here in California, we have not had any major problems. We do water testing, but we primarily are testing for E. coli and turbidity and other pieces that really are challenging. But as far as the chemical components of what's in that water, let's say pollution and different things, we don't do that with rainwater typically. I do have one slide that we'll get to that talks about water quality for bioswales and how bioswales can decrease all the contamination within water there. But yeah. So, but I will say this. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Forgive me because I wasn't clear enough. I guess what I was thinking about was the ramifications of the water sitting in a tank, any tank, for an extended period of time. Not that it would be, or is it? It's a question of whether the tank itself is contaminating.
I see what you're saying. You're talking about like the plastic of the tank, whether that's contaminating the water. Well, so what we found is that, they talk a lot about water bottles and not wanting to drink out of water bottles for some of those challenges. First off, this rainwater is not being drank typically. So that's not as big of a concern going into the landscape. Maybe there's some issue. The biggest thing with plastic and using poly tanks would be the heat. So heat transfer is really where that occurs, where the chemical makeup of that plastic or the poly will then infiltrate that water and alter the water molecule itself a little bit. These tanks, because they're large in volume, rarely ever get warm inside there. The water stays at a pretty even temperature, typically cool. And so as a result of it not getting warm, it doesn't happen as much. But we do generally encourage as much as possible alternatives to the plastic when it can be used. So metal tanks and other alternative materials that aren't the poly are great. But the truth is the poly's so cost effective and so much more available that's done. Does that
Thank you very
answer the
much.
question? Yeah.
Yes, and thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
It's about the economics. Do people do this to save money or because they like what they're doing? In other words, is there a payback period where the cost of the system is paid for by the savings on water consumption?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, thank you for that. It's again, ROI is such an interesting conversation with these systems because it doesn't always pan out that quickly. So a couple things to consider are every site is going to be completely different in this conversation. Not only just the cost of the water that you're getting as a consumer at what region or what your water agency is, but also just, you know, what your uses are, your demands are, and all of that. Now, we have some systems that when I run an ROI for existing water prices, you know, 35, 40 years out, right? So you don't even want to look at that. But what we do is we'll take our ROI numbers and we'll put them on the curve of, okay, over the last 10 years, water has increased in this amount. So then we apply that to the next 10 years and then the next 10 years after that. When we have put it on that scale, we do find that in 10 to 20 years, a lot of these systems will pan out, and some even less. For rainwater, it's a little bit longer than gray water. Gray water has a better ROI. But I will say that most people are not putting these in for the economic ROI. I like to call it the survival ROI or the green ROI. And so, you know, a lot of people get what we like to call green pride. And so people like to show these off and look at how great this is. I have this, you know, really wonderful thing, and they get to talk about it, and it gives them a sense of pride. So there's an investment there. The other side is, as we all saw when the drought was hitting pretty hard in California, they said, hey, you have to stop watering your landscape. And there's some counties, Healdsburg, for example, no one could landscape. Everyone lost their landscape. So if you spent $30,000 on landscaping within the last 10 years, that's a pretty big investment. And in our state where drought is going to be a continual challenge, if you don't have an alternative water source like rainwater collection or gray water, when that hits that you can't water your landscape anymore, you're going to lose $30,000, right? So we look at it a little bit on that side as well. And then also the emergency supply, if there's a bad earthquake and the water system is shut off, which would be detrimental, you know, yeah, I'm not telling people to go drink rainwater out of their tanks, but if there was an emergency, I would be in that tank drinking water, I guarantee it. And so then it's also an emergency supply. And so there's a security ROI. So hopefully that answers the question to the point that I typically don't talk a lot about ROI, and most people aren't doing it for the money itself, the money savings itself. But I like to think of the industry right now as solar was in the 1990s, where people weren't doing it for ROI yet. But now we're looking at, you know, 10, 15 years later, all of a sudden it became a really big thing. And I think that water reuse is going to be going that direction as we have more and more water challenges.
It needs to be going in that direction.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. Okay, cool. Just any more questions right now, or should we keep going?
A really quick one. I'm wondering about drawdown. This is not potable water. Why is there concern about drawdown? For example, the PEC or whoever. I don't understand it.
It's just it's a what if. It's the what if fear. There's a million what ifs, and the what if fear is that maybe the pre-filter wasn't done well enough, and the water sitting in that is going to become contaminated, and maybe a kid's going to fall in there and drink it and die. And, you know, so anyways, it's, to me at least, I think that we're basing a lot of our policy on the extreme what if factor of these, and so that's really my understanding. Or even, you know, yeah, so that's the best I could say to that without having a politician here to tell you. It's for the children, Mercedes. It's for the children.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Yeah.
If I can. So in California, for example, we have a diverse climate situation. I mean, we have dry deserts, we have mountains, we have snowy areas, we have coastal areas. Is the logic to these kinds of systems uniformly applicable to all these areas, or are some kinds of areas more or less conducive to these kinds of systems?
Great question. And absolutely, because it varies so much, it's very much a site-to-site situation. And a good example just to take it even outside of California, would be the East Coast, or let's say Portland. In Portland, you can have a 500-gallon rainwater cistern, or rainwater tank, and that would be enough for your entire landscape for the whole year, because it's refilling every week in the summer, or right, Texas, all these other places. So California, yeah, it's very climate specific. And Southern California is much more difficult to deal with than much northern Klamath, Northern California and the Klamath region, or Humboldt. So yeah, every single site is going to have a much different analysis that's going to lead us to identify, okay, these are the demands we're trying to meet, and based on that climate and that region, these are the challenges that we face and what we need to address. Snow is a big thing in these systems. Freezing can definitely happen. So the high mountain regions, are a little bit more difficult and take some more thought and care, as almost any part of the home does in those areas. But yeah, it is very much on a per site basis, and even within the same city, we can have these unique climate. Being East Bay, right? The entire East Bay is a completely different climate zone almost every single place you go. So yeah, what we do on the other side of the mountain, over there in Lafayette, is way different than what we do in West Oakland. And so yes, it definitely changes. And are there better or worse sites? I would say no. I would just say that there's different approaches to those sites, but the amount of rainwater is big, and the more rainwater you get, the irony of rainwater systems is that the more rainwater that you get, the less you need it for irrigation, and typically people are using it for irrigation. So when I talk ROI, or we get into these systems, the most efficient type of system, I almost always want to push for rainwater to be used for indoor non-potable, because you're still flushing your toilets in the winter. So that rainwater is going to keep falling and filling it up, and you're still going to be flushing that toilet and using it, versus the bipolar climate of California. When you use it for just irrigation, all you really have is that volume of that tank for the most part of savings. Does that answer the question for the most part? Yeah, okay. Sorry, I rambled a bit on there. Well, let's move on to gray water. So gray water reuse is, again, taking the showers, the lavatory sinks, so the bathroom sinks, the laundry, and then there's a few other things that sometimes can come into play, but typically those are the main sources of gray water. You're taking that, you're plumbing it separately, and we're now finding some reuse for it. And so gray water reuse can minimize the strain on wastewater treatment plants, save energy, decreasing pumping and treatment of that water, and it also reduces potable water use. So gray water, it's interesting. Gray water is one of the main reasons I think gray water is important, is because it can help to actually mitigate our infrastructure challenges. So I don't know, we are looking at billions of dollars of infrastructure increased needs for our wastewater piping and our wastewater treatment plants. And gray water can remove up to 60% of the wastewater of a home, out of that need for going to treatment plant. And so if you remove 60% of the gray water out of an entire region's wastewater piping and wastewater treatment systems, then that need for infrastructure enhancements and increasing doesn't exist anymore. So we can save billions of dollars potentially by using gray water, instead of, for example, digging up an entire run of sewer pipe to replace it with a little bit larger, because we now have an increase of population. So that's one thing to think about with gray water. Gray water reuse systems can have ROIs under 10 years. So they do oftentimes have a pretty good ROI and can be looked at. And studies have estimated a gray water system can save up to 40% of total household water consumption, which is significant. An average household of 4 can create 50,000 gallons of gray water annually. So those are just some kind of ideas and thoughts to think about with gray water. And I'll go over a couple of gray water reuse examples for you to look at. And so this is constructed wetland. So this is an interesting home because they didn't want to do a lot of tech. So you can get really technological with gray water systems, but also you can do some pretty simple things. So This was just after it was planted, so, but it's completely lush and amazing right now. But the gray water essentially passes through this here, little swale. We called it a miniature constructed wetlands. It's got a lot of different grasses and plants in it to provide aeration. All this pebble and everything catches all the sediment and the gunk and the whatnot as it goes all the way through here. And then once it gets to the end, it pours down the hill underground. It has to stay, gray water cannot daylight is the idea. So it has to stay subsurface, and it subsurfacely goes into a pipe underground and waters 15 fruit trees down here. So and this was a home that was built, and we worked with the architect to actually design the gray water system. So we were able to say, we need the gray water pipes that come out right here. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So that's an example of a gray water system. And then what's nice, I like about these types of treatments and this type of constructed wetland is it in and of itself is a beautiful aesthetic to the home. So it adds an aesthetic value while being useful to the filtration process of the gray water. All right. Here's another kind of simple, these are a little bit more of like a simple type of system. This just has a series of filters within it that, again, catches that gray water when it first comes in, takes out some of the just gunk, the natural gunk of the gray water. And then there's a small little sump pump in this unit that once the water gets to a certain point, it kicks on and it sends that water out through irrigation piping throughout this yard. This one was uniquely done where you can see here, these 3 purple boxes, we have 3 valves on here that automatically open and close and rotate between them. And so there's actually 3 zones that this gray water is going to, and it's able to water. There's 2 people that live there, but the woman loves taking her baths. So she had some guilt around taking baths all the time. So she called us and said, I want to keep taking my baths. What can I do? And so we got this gray water system in, and now she doesn't use any water for irrigation, and she gets her nightly bath that just keeps her joyful and happy. And so, yeah, so that's a more simplistic gray water system that doesn't cost a lot. There's also laundry to landscape, which is one I don't have in here, but those are the simplest, non-permit needed. You just take your laundry system and you take the discharge of the laundry and you send that directly out to mulch basins around. Yes, I have a question.
Okay, so my question is, you said that the gray water has to be distributed underground. So the first question is why, and the second question is, can you use the gray water to irrigate edible things, vegetables?
Okay, both of those are awesome questions. Number one, why can it not daylight? Again, the answer is for the children. If a child drinks that water that's daylighted and gets sick from it, then gray water will not be allowed anymore. So it's for public health. It's a public health reason that they don't want it to daylight is the answer. And then the second one was for vegetables. So what we say is that it cannot be for any root vegetables. So if it's potatoes or carrots or whatever, any vegetable that gray water is going to touch, we don't recommend. So even strawberries that kind of sit on the ground, if that gray water infiltrates up, then that strawberries are touching that gray water. And the reason is if you pick a strawberry and eat it without washing it properly and the gray water is on it, you could get sick from that. But tomatoes and other vegetables, the roots aren't going to pull up whatever potential biological activity might be happening that would be, detrimental to public health. It's not going to end up in the vegetable itself. So any above ground vegetable, and especially fruit trees, are really good with gray water.
Hey,
I think I had a hand up for a deep.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
you got it. Dietmar, hi. So
yeah,
Tony,
Dietmar.
I have a question about the pre-packaged box you showed in the last picture that has the basic filtration in it. That one, yeah. So the client who takes the goes into the tub every night, basically.
Yep.
What about surge capacity? Is the pump then strong enough to distribute it right away? Because otherwise you would need a buffer tank, right?
Yeah, definitely. So the irrigation system is set up to handle that surge. And so the pump kicks on pretty quickly. It doesn't wait till it's totally full to kick on. So it kicks on about halfway, and that water starts rushing out of there pretty quick. So we watched a full bath drain 4 or 5 times. And as you know, when a full bath drains, it doesn't like all come out, right?
It's like
but
basically the pump can keep up with it, and then
Correct.
I see, of course, it has the overflow. If it's overwhelmed or something, it
Correct.
just overflows into the sewer.
It'll go into the sewer system, or if the system for any reason needs to be diverted. Let's say you take a salt bath, right? You don't want that salt to get out to those plants. So then you can divert it with this little valve right here that can switch it over and send it to a different, down to the sewer system. But yeah, that's a requirement of all gray waters. There has to be a diversion valve where that gray water can get sent back to the sewer system instead of the gray water system. It is a
and do you have, of these standard boxes, do you have a preferred brand? I think not all of them are permissible in California, or is that
well, so
lax?
this is an aqua to use box. They're great. The pumps fail at times, but every pump fails. But yeah, this is a good system, aqua to use. They have a couple different varieties of this, and then G Flow. I think it might have, there might be a different name for it, but the G Flow system. Also, I think it's out of Australia. These are from Malaysia, or yeah, maybe I can't remember where they're from, but yeah, the G Flow I think is Australia, and they also are a great system. Both of them are have their pluses and minuses, but we've used both of them and like them both.
And do they come, or do you? This one seems, you mentioned you had to have a separate valve distribution system that's built independently. Are there units with an indexing valve that basically every time it kicks in, it switches to the next kind of
that's where
branch?
the G Flow has a unit that's like for 4 zones, or so it has it all kind of pre-done and built in. So if you're not wanting to tinker and come up with your own solutions for that, then the G Flow has an upgraded unit that can do some of that for you. So I'd recommend going that route if you wanted that. But this is typically used just as a simple, hey, just send it right out to one zone and just hit 7 or 8 fruit trees, or whatever can handle the gray water. But what we found is that oftentimes gray water is too much, especially if you've already done some healthy landscaping here, which we're seeing, a lot of these natives here, they don't want as much water as coming through that gray water system. So funny enough, a lot of times we'll have gray water systems in, and we'll be like, hey, plant every tropical plant you ever wanted, like all the high water need plants. You actually want to plant them because you have so much water. So yeah, gray water can do that. But yeah, I would say the G Flow has a more robust automation system of going to multiple zones.
Great, that's awesome. Last question for you, as I unfortunately missed the beginning of your presentation. Does your firm do the design component solely, or do you also do design build, or have like contractors that you always work with?
Yeah, so we were design build for a long time, and then COVID ripped the build out of us. And so now we've sort of transitioned into being mostly a construction management on the construction side of it. So we'll train plumbers. I also consider it workforce development. I feel like if I train a plumber on how to do gray water, they might actually talk to a client about it down the line. So I really have gotten to the place where, of course, we can come in and do it ourselves, but now if we can get more people to know how to do it and feel comfortable with it, that this might help move spread the movement further.
Great, thank you so much.
So
great,
that's what we do.
Perfect.
Yeah,
thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. All right, let's keep moving. I think I'm gonna have to hustle through a little bit. I might get a bit behind, but if we're getting questions as we go along, then maybe we won't have as many at the end. So gray water reuse, then we can kick it up a notch. Gray water can actually be treated to NSF 350 standards, which allows it to be then reused for non-potable uses. So this is a system in Oakland, Piedmont, I believe it was, that we took all the rainwater from the home, all the gray water from the home, and we pulled it, from all these sources here, goes into our gray water treatment train, and that's this NSF 350 biomembrane reactor system, which does an amazing job of treating that water. There's a storage tank for that water, and from that storage tank, we can now legally
take us 20 minutes to get up there.
pump. Oh, sorry. We can legally pump water into the toilets at that point. So that is kind of a pretty awesome new piece, and we have about 25 or 30 of these systems throughout the Bay Area and Sacramento at this point that are saving amazing amounts of water. Again, it's because it's gray water, it does need more maintenance. It needs a little bit more, making sure that system really is clean, because things can go awry in gray water pretty quickly. So there's a higher maintenance piece to it than rainwater for non-potable reuse, but it's pretty cool that you can do that. And then mechanical water, we haven't done a lot of. We did a little bit on a building in San Francisco for the cooling towers. The blow down water we used in a cistern that was combined with rainwater. And so that was kind of cool. And this is a small residential where we actually took the condensate from the AC, which I think ended up being in the summer heavy running months, like, a few gallons a day or something here or there. But it was something. And so that got added into the rainwater tanks because they were dry by the time the AC was kicking on regularly. So anyways, it's something that can be done and considered, and just a nice reuse for that condensate. All right, so that was buildings. So now we're going to move on to sites. And again, I know you all do this. You have to do your drainage, your grading plans, your drainage plans. All of those are essential for the architecture of the that you want, the building that you'd like to put on that site. You have to really consider the site. So we like to come in and we like to consider ourselves the step before the civil engineer, and that'll come up, but we oftentimes will make the civil engineer's job easier because they'll have less drainage to deal with, less issues and challenges, and less grading needs to deal with the stormwater. So site water, again, is all that water that's falling on the site that's not the rooftops. And for stormwater and site drainage, there's a bunch of natural solutions that can be considered to mitigate that stormwater that all happen before the drain basin, before we get it into the pipes and send it into that sewer system, or I'm sorry, into the stormwater system. And so, here's a small example of just a simple, this ended up being an aesthetic piece for the landscape, but it also catches the rainwater that falls off of this roof here, gets fed into here and the other side. So it gets pulled away and it goes through this nicely. And it has a couple of different little undulations throughout it of pools where that water can sit and actually infiltrate instead of just rushing off the site and ending up in the storm drain and taking all the dirt and soil with it. But that's a small example. And this is an example of at a San Francisco school of a bioswale that was in the middle of winter. So the plants unfortunately weren't looking spectacular, but in the summer it looked really beautiful. But you can see that we made curb cuts all along this. And so all that water from this big playground, which is a huge playground, ends up in here, and it actually holds that water and allows it to infiltrate instead of just getting sent away with all the contamination of the asphalt. So, and then here's that site for the water quality. I wanted to say this is another large bioswale that we did. This is in Richmond, and this is off of a parking lot. So we went into a parking lot, we redid the parking lot, and actually added 2 parking spaces, even though we made the parking lot smaller. And then we did all these curb cuts along the edge of the parking lot here. And we added curb cuts into all the little, there's another bioswale that's up this parking lot a little ways. The cat is another first catch. But all that water comes in and then gets infiltrated through this bioswale of beautiful plants and permeable, different permeable materials that then flows and ends up in this creek, the Baxter Creek, that goes along Richmond, which is an insanely contaminated creek, not only of trash, but just of heavy metals and oils and diesel. And we've been running tests on this with the nonprofit that we worked with to do this. They did this recent test, and I just wanted to show you all. This is the inflow of diesel. So they test right here where this curb cut is. They catch that water, they take it to the testing, and then they go to the backside over here where there is the creek, and there's a little outflow pipe at the bottom of this where this is all infiltrated and gets to a pipe and then flows out into the creek. And this is the outflow number for that diesel. It is such a huge drop. And then amazingly, motor oil was a much higher number. And by the end, at the outflow where that goes into the creek, we had 0 trace of motor oil. So this is just a good example of how on sites we can do water quality enhancements as well as and not to mention just the erosion, simple erosion getting into our creeks and creating all the problems that they do there. All right, so for sites, there's also reuse for irrigation. So, inevitably you're going to have landscaping on your site after the home is built, and that's going to need water. And so for that irrigation, do we really need to use potable water supply? Like, shouldn't we save that potable water for the 8 billion people that need to actually drink it? So there's a lot of reuse opportunities as we've gone through rainwater, gray water, as well as rain gardens and different things that we can do. So just really taking that into consideration, let's make sure that that irrigation system doesn't take potable water if it doesn't need it. And then civil collaboration. So, be civil, right? So we are, again, we have a civil engineer that we team with. So we can be brought in to be the civil team. And so that can happen, which in our minds is great because it's very fluid and flows well. And they're open to all of our crazy, wild, natural solution ideas. But even in a situation where there's an existing civil, as this site was, we can come in and we can support and help solve some problems. So the civil was actually planning, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but they were planning this huge planter bed here that was going to be 3 feet tall and had bubblers in it. It was going to deal with all the site drainage and all the issues and challenges. And it was just this aesthetic nightmare as far as we're concerned from the aesthetic piece. And the homeowner was, the developer was very upset that their multifamily home was going to have that. So it was like, can we get rid of that? And so then we did rainwater. So we got rainwater collection as one step of it. We added permeability. So everything, they had just a regular asphalt. So this is now an all permeable driveway that's going to be coming through here. And then we also created all these catches for any of the areas around. And we were able to essentially eliminate the need for that giant planter that was going to mitigate that stormwater. So we can oftentimes come in and help them have a little bit less work. So that's what we try to do. And then beyond landscaping, again, we do landscape design. We have a landscape architect that we team with for any stamps needed. But we do a lot of landscape design because really that's where it begins. If we don't design our landscapes intelligently, it doesn't matter how many rainwater, gray water, BMPs we put in, we could still save so much more by just doing this. And oftentimes we get brought in by a client who wants to have this awesome rainwater system, and I will talk them out of it. I'll say, don't waste your money. You're not going to save enough water. Put in a smart timer, or let's change let's remove your lawn and put in, some nice fruit or vegetables or native plants. There's so many steps that need to be taken prior to putting in a rainwater or gray water system that I think it's really important are considered instead of just, like, I just want rainwater because it's cool and sexy, or whatever it is that you just have to. We like to approach it from what's going to be your best, the best water savings for what you spend. So that's kind of what we look at, and landscape is a great place to do it. Here's just another landscape, native plants used. This site, sorry, my thing's in the way again. This thing has it incorporates gray water, permeability, edibles, reused materials, soil health materials, natives and drought tolerant plants, and pollinator friendly plants. So all of these things can come into play really easily in landscaping and should be taken into consideration for all the sites. And this just adds that beautiful value to the home. We know that they say that curb appeal is 25% of the home. And I think also the health and the how sustainable the home is probably significantly a lot about what the landscape is as well. So making sure that that's a consideration when you're having homes built is really important. Okay, I have a little bit. I can run through this again quickly. Are there any questions at this point? I can get to the end of my presentation in the next few minutes if you want me just to run through. But if there's any questions, please let me know. We're good. Okay, we'll continue. So I just wanted to go over our project and program process. So we also do programmatic pieces. Oh, I see something in the chat. Here, let me check that real quick. Oh, that's just something else. Okay, never mind. So I wanted to just go through our process. So when we team with a lot of architects, we team with a lot of civil engineers and a lot of developers on doing the type of work that you saw that I showed today. And this is just kind of our general process of how we do it. So we help with development. So if we get brought in early enough in the planning phases, we can help talk about some of these things like, oh, hey, instead of doing this drainage, plan, why don't we consider doing a bioswale that can then eliminate your need for all those drain basins here and here and here. Let's do rainwater collection so that we're not worrying about the amount of stormwater coming off of the rooftop. You don't have to take that into consideration for your drainage plans. So we can kind of help with a lot of those pieces of the puzzle if we get plugged in early enough. And especially with the landscaping and how that landscaping is going to come into play. Outreach, again, programmatically, we do a lot of programs throughout California with different nonprofits and different water agencies and DWR. And so we'll do outreach into the communities to try to educate people on the opportunities. Like, you can do these things at your home, and let us help. So we'll get involved there. And then education, similarly, we do We do a lot of showcase sites where we can do that. We do volunteer days where we teach people how to do this. Workforce development, as I was saying earlier, we do a lot of workforce development. And then the rest of this process, I will actually go into all the rest of these in some slides really quick. The last one being maintenance. We also just, one of the things I see all day long is these beautiful bioswales get put in, or an amazing curb cut street with, great mitigation of the stormwater off of that street gets put in, but then it just gets left to turn into weeds and disaster and looks terrible in 3 or 4 years. So the maintenance piece of it is something we all forget about and are easy to let go of, but we try to make sure that that remains a centerpiece of this, because I want people to look at the bioswale and be excited about it and see something beautiful, not something that's completely unmaintained and what's the point of it? And then it sort of, makes it a negative situation. So looks like some more chat stuff is going on here. Oh, this is just all, okay, I will stop being worried about chats. So yeah, let's go into the other pieces of our process. So this is for a larger program that we were doing, but this is some of our GIS work that we can do. So for larger sites or larger, regions, we can do some pretty cool GIS stuff that will allow us to come up with stormwater, how much stormwater is going to be falling on a certain region, how much gray water can be collected, mechanical water. Again, we talk about mechanical water. And then we do ocean-friendly gardens and then rainwater. This is ocean-friendly gardens because this is the Ventura region, but it can be bay-friendly gardens or whatever it might be. And what we do is we use the process of the aerial imagery, analyzing the rooftop, the permeability, the impermeable spaces for the stormwater. And then we use oftentimes we'll use census data and CMIS data to overlay a whole bunch of different calculations that will come into play and create this sort of interactive map. And what's cool is we can zoom in on sites. This is parcel based, so we can actually go zoom in and look at a specific parcel. We also use it for suitability to be able to say, where is the best place to put rainwater collection in this region? And then that, again, can be done on sort of larger homes. So for example, in Plymouth, right outside of Sacramento, we're working with an architect who's developing a 200-acre site. And they want to do a big event center and grapes and all this stuff. And so we're running GIS right now to then analyze, okay, where's the best place to send stormwater when we're overflowing it? Where should we have check dams and rain gardens? And where should we collect rainwater? And even where's a good place for a site based on how that water is going to be moving throughout the site? So we don't put a building right where a seasonal stream will exist, for example. So anyways, that's some of our analysis that we can do on a GIS scale. And this is just an example to look at here. Assessments. So then we do an assessment. So we'll do client and site assessment. Site assessment will obviously be walked, but client assessment is important based on what their values and what the goals are, as well as what their usage is. So we do, for example, a gray water decision matrix. We have a rainwater one, and this is just a decision matrix to basically apply various criteria of what matters to you, like cost, water savings, easy to maintain, aesthetics, or ease of build. So, they get to value each of those. And then that allows us to look at the different types of gray water systems that are out there and then make an assessment as to what we deem to be, hey, this is probably your best direction to go with what your values are. So that's an example of a client assessment. And then site assessments, obviously, we're looking at, okay, where can we put rain tanks? Where should we do gray water? Is the gray water accessible? All that stuff. So we do a lot of different site assessments. And then design, we do design, which this is a water example. So this was a gray water system that was the NSF 350, flushing toilets, doing laundry, but also a underground rainwater cistern over here to collect all the rainwater off of the home. And so we were looking to mitigate 70% of the home's water usage from these two things. And here's some of the graphs that we use and some of the ways that we'll do. This is part of our assessment package that we then plug into some of our designs. But yeah, we can do design. We can do again, stormwater and drainage design with natural solutions as primary focus. Then we can do the rainwater, gray water, all the alternative water usage. We can also do landscape design. And again, I have a civil engineer that we can bring in that we work with to do civil components of designs. And oversee. So we oversee the construction. And again, that was what I spoke about earlier. Oftentimes we'll be out there doing some of the more technical pieces of it, whether that's the telemetry and the monitoring that we might be doing, or if we're doing a special tank, or if we're doing something really kind of unique that we maybe want to just do ourselves. We might do some stuff ourselves and not, try to train people on that, or train people while we're doing it is the other option. But we love training plumbers and landscape contractors on these tools because, again, I feel like it really helps to spread this type of work, and more people can do it, the better it is. There hopefully will be more and more demand for this. And so we do, at the end of the day, we have really low capacity. I mean, our firm is probably one of 5 firms in California that can do what we do. Obviously we do it better than all of them, but there is the reality that there's not enough people out there. And I worked with someone who said their dream is to have, just like they have to have a solar person at every time you're developing, and an architect is doing a new home, you have to have a solar person there, energy, right? They want to have a water person there as well, a water consultant for every time. So that's what we're looking to, and we want to build that capacity. Monitoring, as I said before, this is that site in San Francisco. Here's all the monitoring systems. It brings up all the different telemetry that we have, all the different sensors, and there's rainwater tank sensor, there's gray water tank sensors. All of that's getting fed into a data collector that then sends it to the cloud, and then I can look at and do an analysis on all of that. It also allows me to check for any issues. I get text message when a tank is low. I get text message if the pump is not putting out enough pressure. I get text message if all these different things might go wrong, and then I can check the system. I can also override the system from remotely. I could be hanging out in Bali, which sounds great with my family, and something could go wrong with the system, and I could change that valve so that it goes to municipal and let them know I'll be back in a couple years to help you with your system. So there's cool things we can do with this kind of telemetry and monitoring. Multi-benefits are just big. Saving water is obviously huge, and one of the reasons we do it, but the other reasons come into play a lot of multi-benefits: stormwater mitigation, water quality, fire resilience, habitat restoration, infrastructure resilience, potable demand, and food resilience. So don't forget all the important things that come into play. And then the last thing is on this programmatic thing. Okay, a 500-gallon rainwater tank might not seem like much in one site, and does that really matter? Is that really going to help us in the long run as a civilization to make the important changes we're trying to make? The answer is yes, especially when you aggregate those impacts. And so this is really important to look at this aggregated impacts. This is the Oakland Rain Barrel program that went on in 2012. We installed a few hundred rain barrels during that time. We were one of their main partners. And they now mitigate from that program over 600,000 gallons of storm water. Not to mention the water, potable water saved, which is also at least that much. And so once you start really adding these things up, it really comes to be large impact and really important. And that is my presentation. Thank you all so much for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tony.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'll just see if anyone here in the room has any questions, comments. Nope. Anything coming through on chat?
Let's see, we had a couple chats, but I think it's all, let's see here. Here maybe is a question. Have you heard about water having a memory? No need to discuss. I love it. Thank you, Susan. I've studied some of that. I mean, I know especially that work around the water being able to absorb energy and actually molecule adjusting per the energy that it's receiving. So there's some amazing stuff. But as far as water having a memory, I love that idea, and I can't say I know a ton about it, but I would love to chat with you anytime about it, Susan. Let me know. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Ismar.
Okay, sounds like we're wrapped up in terms of questions. Tony, thank you so much. It was fantastic. Really appreciate it. Hope to have you down in person one day and do a part 2.
Absolutely. I would love that. Thank you all for your time, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I think my contact information was on the thing sent out, and hopefully I get a chance to meet you all in person one of these days.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thanks for your time, everybody. Have a wonderful day.